In the winter of 2014, Irving Bromberg attended a screening of the movie Fury, the Brad Pitt film which depicted a tank crew from the 2nd Armored Division fighting during the last months of World War II in Europe. He felt the movie's first battle scene was unrealistic because tanks were too close together and advancing abreast. We always staggered ourselves, he said. Staggering forced the Germans to re-aim their weapons whenever they shifted fire from one tank to another. Keeping distance between the tanks, likewise, made it harder for the enemy to knock them out quickly.
Cat-F. Welcome to World War II Live. I'm your host, John C. McManus, and that was, of course, the voice of my good buddy and co-host, Kevin Hemel, quoting from a really fascinating article that he wrote. Kevin, you called this article "The Real Fury: A Tanker's View of War."
I did, John. And John, I just want to say tonight I am the Oscar Goldman to your Steve Austin.
Oscar Goldman by Steve Austin.
I was going to go
$6 million man.
I was going to go with Bigfoot, but I didn't know if anybody would get that reference.
The Bigfoot has kind of gone away, sort of. It seems like to me he's not out there in pop culture the way he used to be.
Well, but to me, it was one of the greatest two-part episodes of The $6 Million Man when he went up against Bigfoot, and my father walked into the room and said, "That's the fakest thing ever." But then it turned out my father was wrong because Bigfoot turned out to be an alien robot. So, take that, Dad.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. We always know better than our fathers, and that's just another example right there. Yeah. Bigfoot rules, obviously, too. So what we thought we'd talk about in this episode is one of the articles that Kevin wrote, like I said, and I mean, no one knows tankers like you do and armor like you do, so I can imagine the passion you had for this article. Again, it's called "The Real Fury: A Tanker's View of War," and you published it in WWII Quarterly a few years ago. This guy was in the 2nd Armored Division, just like is portrayed in the movie, right?
Yeah, he was. And Mark, tell us about, before we get into that, tell us what we are to expect in tonight's episode after we talk about some Fury.
I'm not sure I can top the $6 Million Man Bigfoot episode. That was amazing, Kevin. I mean, as a child of the 70s, you just brought me right back. That was great, so thank you for that. All right, so we had something real special tonight in Stump the Chumps. Besides our viewer questions, we have a viewer sent in a picture of something they need help identifying. So if you're listening, you jump over to the YouTube channel and watch the video, because you have to take a look at this thing, because someone in the world probably knows what this World War II artifact is, and we're hoping you can help us out. So it's going to be a really good Stump the Chumps.
Fantastic. And John, sponsoring tonight's episode are our friends at the National World War II Museum and their Patton's War Symposium, or Patton Man of War Symposium. And so I just want to mention that, even 80 years after his death, George Patton still, he looms large in the memory, of people in World War II, and with good reason. So I want people to join me and other top historians on March 13th and 14th at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans for Patton Man of War, a symposium exploring the life, service, and legacy of one of America's most famous commanders. So if you go to the website, National WW2, the number 2, museum.org, so that's National WW2 museum.org, you can learn more about it. You can sign up for the symposium. I'll be there. I'll probably be on crutches, but I'm looking forward to meeting everybody there. So with that, John, let's talk about the 2nd Armored Division and my friend, Irving Bromberg.
Yeah, so how did that interview come together? Where did it all start, and how did you approach this thing?
Well, it's interesting because I was working for WWII History Magazine, writing a lot of veteran interviews, and Irving's son reached out to the magazine and said, "Hey, you really got to interview my father. He was a World War II tanker." And I got to be honest, I was very skeptical because I had just interviewed someone who turned out to be a World War II faker, and I was very suspect. So when I interviewed Mr. Bromberg, I immediately went to the National Archives, pulled the records on the 2nd Armored Division, and everything he said matched up. There were a few things that didn't. He talked about fighting in the hedgerow country and losing a lot of friends in a week, and I was able to find each friend's name, but it stretched out to almost a month. And so by telling him this, it sort of broadened his brain, and he was able to fill in other details. It was really kind of amazing to experience in real time, as, I told him the dates, and then he would stretch it. And in fact, one of the things I found in the file, John, he mentions in my story that at one point he's sitting he was a bow gunner on a Sherman tank, and he's sitting in the bow gunner position next to the tank driver down in the front of the tank, and he fell asleep and had some kind of nightmare and charged out of the tank towards the enemy line. And the tank driver jumped out and tackled him and pulled him back to the tank. And I actually found a Bronze Star for his friend, but the language was a little vague. And I remember saying, Mr. Bromberg, did that happen on this date? And he was like, Kevin, I don't know. It was all a blur to me.
Yeah, right.
So it was fascinating, because this man had fought in North Africa, in Tunisia, in Sicily, across France, into Germany. He doesn't make it through the war, but we'll get to that.
Well, when I read that part of the article, the first thing that came to mind for me is I thought, well, I mean, he's got PTSD already at that point. I mean, that's what's happening there, is he's having basically a combat nightmare, and I mean, it's half, walking in your sleepwalking kind of thing, just but a combat setting now. And his buddy, tackles him before it can get any worse. I mean, this guy had seen a lot of combat, and there's a number of manifestations of that too. There's the other incident where, we're going a long way into this. I mean, he starts out in North Africa with the 1st Armored Division, actually, as a fill-in there, and then he goes back to the 2nd Armored Division. He's in Sicily, and then, of course, in Normandy. And,
right.
On the eve of the Normandy invasion, he's in England just drinking like a fish. I love how honest he is with you, because most guys, it seems like to me, most interviews, it's like, everybody else was drinking and carousing with women of the evening, but me, I was just reading my Bible, and you start to add up the numbers, it's like, come on now. And it seemed like to me, my impression was he was really honest with you.
He really was. He really was. And, John, it was a hard interview because of his honesty. And, asking him, because in North Africa, he's with the 2nd Armored, but he gets transferred to the 1st Armored because they took such heavy casualties at Kasserine Pass. And he's like, I'm in a tank with guys, I don't even know who they are. And, and I had to ask him, because he said, they come across a German tank, and the German tank fires first, it misses. The American tank fires, they miss. But the American tank reloads faster than a German tank. So they're able to hit it with a round, and then the guys in the German tank get out. And he said, I sprayed them. And I said, did you kill them? And he goes, oh, yeah, I killed them all. And what was amazing to me, I thought they were like, and then when I wrote the first draft, and they raced off. And he goes, Kevin, we were going like 5 miles an hour. We didn't, it's not the movies. This is real. We travel at a very slow pace. So that was so surprising to me. And I think the real shock was what happens to him at the end, because he would be kind of vague, and I would have to pursue the questions. We can talk about that now, or unless you want to wait till the end of the article. The end of the interview.
No, get after right now. I'm kind of curious.
So he's in combat for so long. What is it? At November, they get to a coal mine to take showers, and he takes his uniform off, and he's nothing but skin and bone. And that's what, like, when I saw Brad Pitt in Fury, I'm like, no. You're not going to be buff.
And, as a 50-year-old, too, way too old, but looks younger.
And he talked about how he stopped getting close to people. He stopped looking at the casualty reports every day, which was a habit of his. He met a young guy who was like, when are we going to get to the enemy? When are we going to get to the enemy? And he goes, don't worry, we're going to get there. We're taking a break. And then they go into combat for like 2 or 3 days. And he comes out and he goes over to the tank and he says, hey, where's the guy I kind of became friends with? They're like, he broke down. We had to pull him out of the tank, And the big one is, he's in the field. It's like April of 1945, deep into Germany. And he said, we fired at everybody in Germany. There was one case that he did not fire on civilians. So like you were saying, he was very honest with me. It was an old man. But he said that his tank got hit, and he jumped out and started to run back to the American lines, and he comes across a German with a machine gun, with a Schmeiser, And he's like, oh my God. And he takes off running to the American line, and the German is running behind him with his hands behind his head. And when Bromberg catches up to his own troops, he grabs a rifle to kill the German, and they have to wrestle him down. And they're like, you can't shoot a prisoner, it's not cool. And he says, like, what did he say? That, he remembers a Jeep coming, and they took him away, and he's in a first aid station. And all he remembers is someone dropping a half-lit cigarette on the ground, and him going, what a waste. And he goes, the next thing I knew, I'm in England. I mean, his brain had just kind of shut down. And the thing that he told me, he said that, the doctors would come down the corridor every day to check on everybody. And there was a guy sitting across from him, and the doctors would show up, and he's like, hey, docs, how you doing? What's going on? And he goes, God, I envied him, Kevin, because he could talk to the doctors, and I couldn't. And I'm like, I know I got to push this. I said, well, were you hit in the neck or something? And he goes, no, Kevin, I was crazy. He just flat out, and he's like, they had to give me shots so I could build up an appetite. They started feeding me, and then the real, almost tragic thing, after VE Day, the war ends in May of 45, and the doctor at the hospital says, do you want to continue your treatment here, or would you rather go home? And he's like, wow, there's all that rationing back home, and things are terrible. No, I'll stay here. And then a friend from home visits him and says, what are you doing? Everything's great back. Because that's what the sergeants, the NCOs would tell them. Like, oh, everything's horrible back home. You don't want to go there. And when he realizes, he races to the doctor and tells him what a mistake he made. And fortunately, the doctor just ripped up the papers.
Yeah, kudos to the doctor for accommodating him. There's just so much to unpack with the whole thing. It's such a fascinating article. And I think one of the reasons why it is it's written by somebody who really understands the whole armor world and like the crew and everything. I hear this story about him, working on a tank with guys he doesn't know, and man, that is a really disquieting thing because you got to be in sync with these other guys in a tank, much more so than like if I'm in a rifle squad. I mean, I know that's serious business too, but not quite like a tank. The crew having to work together. Then later this part where he's lost so much weight. I mean, I think that's coming from the stress of combat in a way, because as a tanker, he could be eating 10-in-1 rations and eating pretty well and also foraging and have room in the tank to have stuff, right? I mean, so there's that element. And then this part, like you said, where he can't really talk. And that's not really concussion. That's a symptom of combat fatigue or PTSD. So look at how honest he's being with you, but you're getting insight into the toll on this guy. I mean, it's really kind of disquieting when you step back and think about it that way.
Yeah, it really takes a lot of the glory out of it. And he was the first tanker I really interviewed, and I really appreciated it. And from then on, I really tried to interview tankers because I just felt, and I know you feel this way probably too, and same with you, Mark, that, as a reader, we have a lot of exposure to infantry stories and to airborne stories and things like that, because the guys would write these memoirs or the historians would interview them. But it doesn't seem like people interview tankers or artillerymen. And I think with the tankers, it's because they're a little intimidated by the tech of it all. But once you start interviewing these guys and realizing they're human beings, and they then explain, I had a driver explain how you drive a tank. Bromberg explained to me passing up ammo. Most of the ammo would be in the turret, but there was ammo down by him, and in later tanks we actually stored it in water so it wouldn't, ignite. But that imagery of him just passing shells up from his position, made it so real, and it just gave me such an extra level of understanding of what it was like in those tanks.
Yeah, well, then it shines through because you get a sense, because he's in a number of different jobs. He drives the tank sometimes. He alternates with the driver, so you get that part of it, and then there's a residual of that too, because later on when he's driving a car in civilian life, he's still trying to drive it like the tank with like the gear, downshifting the gears and all this business, and obviously that didn't
Dad work. Yelling at him.
Yeah, Dad's all frustrated and yelling at him, which then takes us into another more serious element of this, is he's never really able to talk to his dad and his brother about what happened to him. And if we had their point of view, I'm only guessing, but if we had their point of view, they would be like, he was never the same, and we don't quite know what happened, and we don't grasp it, and we always wanted to know but didn't. And then he's like so many other veterans too. I think we really tend to overlook this. Whatever it was, that first year or two back is just kind of lost time. He's drinking, he's getting in fights with people. There were so many people feeling restless and dislocated, difficult adjustment, a lot of alcohol problems. We tend to think, greatest generation, they dealt with it, and that is nonsense. It's like it's just the casualties of war. That's the way it works. A lot of them, of course, got past that or got their act together or whatever, but also they were always carrying the war with them, even when they're 90 years old. And so I think it kind of trivializes it when we say they came home and they really adjusted and they did this great thing.
Right, and then they built a great society.
Yeah, which strictly speaking may be true, and I don't want to take anything away from them, but I think it also trivializes the struggles they went through. And I think that really shines through in the article.
Thank you. This isn't in the article, but just reminded me what you were just saying, all that greatest generation stuff. The veterans I talked to, when it came to the GI Bill did three things. It paid for education, paid for housing, and paid for nothing. They gave you a check for 6 months. And a lot of the veterans said that was the most important thing. I wasn't ready to be home. I wasn't ready to adjust. And just being able to have money coming in while I got my brain together was the most important thing. Yep. You don't see that in the movies and the documentaries, that it took that, tough adjustment. But Mr. Bromberg, I'm so glad his son contacted me. I'm so glad he was so open. And John, you know how uncomfortable it is asking those questions of veterans. I've gotten better at it over the years. But it's, when a veteran tells you something that is wrong and you have to correct them, they actually respond very positively. Like, oh, geez, I've had that wrong for 80 years. But it's tough to question, and things like that.
Well, it's tough to probe around because you're dealing with personal stuff.
Personal trauma.
Yeah, personal trauma that maybe somebody's carried around for decades, and this isn't someone you know very well. And yet, in a weird way, we can probe it more than the people who know them so well. Yeah, that's the odd thing, because how many family members have we dealt with who say, "Oh, he never told me that. I never knew that. All these things he told you, or another historian, whoever." I mean, and I think that's sad and tragic. It's the very people we love that we can't level with. About these experiences. It's really amazing.
Well, I tell a lot of the family members, I said, well, do you ever tell your kids what you did when you were 18 to 20? And they're like, no. I go, well.
There you go. Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point.
John, for all of his combat, I do want to mention the movie Fury, but one of the stories that really stuck with me is that I think he was going to the bathroom over the side of the tank, and a personnel carrier rolls by. And they see German helmets, and they're like, oh, those Germans have surrendered. And then they realize, no, that's a German half-track rolling through. And he mentions it to the guy standing next to him, and the guy just drops down into the turret, spins the turret, blasts that thing right in the rear. And then the next morning, he goes out and walks through this debris of human body parts and everything, and he picks up wallets, and he sees photographs of families. He goes, I never thought the Germans were people until I saw those photographs. And he'd been fighting the war since North Africa.
Because he had to think of it that way. And he's in a tank, so the war tends to be impersonal. But now he saw it up front. And he saw the detritus of what they had done. And I think probably, they would have to think there's some associated guilt there. Also, too, imagine the concussion. I mean, when you're turning the turret around and firing off that shot, and he's standing there, doing his business. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's just crazy on so many levels to kind of strip it down and realize what this actually was. I think, and the party told you about Fury too. I wanted to mention that. That's as old as World War II veterans themselves. They're always telling you that everybody's too packed close together. So like on the infantry world, which obviously I deal with a lot, Saving Private Ryan, they would say, oh, we weren't that close together on the beach, and they're right. But it's the cinematic challenge. You've got to have stuff closer together than you would in real life, of course. And I think he's right. Like the tank battle is not realistic, but in terms of capturing the workaday relationship of the crew and the stress of it all. I mean, I think the movie is really amazing on that level. And I wonder if Bromberg sort of recognized that side of it to you, or whether you address that at all with him.
I think it really hit him, the religious character. And he goes, oh, that's right, we had a guy like that in my unit. And I had asked him, and now I ask all veterans this, that, in combat, you either become religious or superstitious which one were you and what was your ritual? And he said he had to keep the pipe, he smoked a pipe, and he had to keep it in an exact certain position to ensure that he would live. You know, and we can't make fun of that or criticize that. If that's what got him through, you know, almost getting killed every day, yes, I think that's great. You know,
of course, it's a way we try and assume control over that which we have no control over, and that means everything to us. So it's no different than a bomber crewman with his lucky, you know, St. Christopher medal, or it could be anything. Whatever it be. In Memphis Belle, it's a guy who puts a rubber band around his wrist. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. And I just think he's so much like millions and millions of other people who had those kind of superstitions. The character in the movie is played by Shia LaBeouf, Bible. Right. And that really is an affecting character, I think. I think it's interesting that Bromberg told you that he knew someone kind of like that. That was to the credit of the movie. That was my impression. What did you think?
No, I thought it was really good. In fact, and I also remember saying to him, because I was like, would they really take a guy with zero experience and throw him in a tank? And Bromberg goes, oh yeah. Like, it didn't even faze him, you know? He's like, oh yeah, they definitely did that. You know, so that was alarming.
Right.
And of course, the only problem he really had was the very ending, where he goes, no, in April of 45, the Germans are running away. They're not attacking with SS units, and you know, they're not jumping out of the tank to get more ammo and not getting shot.
And then the way the attack was so stupid too, obviously. So there's that's Hollywood too.
Yeah. You know, John, I wanted to ask you what you thought. So, like I mentioned, he talked about losing a bunch of friends in a week in the hedgerows, and it was really more of a month. And I was rereading it, and I'm like, is this confusing or does it make sense? Because people were inviting him to their tanks, and he was saying no, and then that tank would get knocked out, or, you know, and then he'd lose this friend, and then this company commander would get killed. Did that all gel? Or, because I was like, I hope that's not confusing to a reader.
I didn't think it was confusing, because you focus on two COs, I think, who seemed to make an impression on him, and so you got a sense of what happened to these guys, including the good one, who, you know, sort of pays the price for that. No, I mean,
the ultimate price.
It's hard to sort through someone's combat experience like that, and to make it all agree in terms of a story and to make it coherent. I had no problem following it. I mean, it was good. It was very straightforward. But one of the things I wondered about, you know, your takeaway, Second Armored Division to us is kind of legendary, and especially after Fury, of course.
Right.
It's hell on wheels. It's a great unit. Did you sense any kind of unit pride that he had, you know, all those years later, that had stayed with him?
No, he was just telling me a story. Boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And, you know, in like Fury the movie, it's like this tank crew that's been together since North Africa. You know, that is not his experience at all. You can see the rotations and stuff like that. I think a lot of the 8th Air Force movies get that kind of right. The guys are moving around to different bombers, and then they lose a guy who moved and he shouldn't have, that kind of stuff. Yeah, he really was matter of fact. He didn't mention anything about marching on Veterans Day or any patriotic stuff. I think he went out to fight a war, it ate him up, and he recovered from it. You know, and I think
what did he end up doing? What did he end up doing eventually? Yeah,
he became a plumber and had his own business, and then his two sons, you know, it was like, you know, Bromberg and Sons Plumbing, and so the two sons inherited the biz. And I want to say I reached out to him a year or two after the article came out for some reason, and the phone was dead. So he had passed away. So I don't know what the circumstances were, but you know, the son who called me was so proud of him, and he's like, "You really got to do a story on my father." And like I said, very skeptical because of the D-Day faker I'd interviewed. But so glad I did, and I'm so glad I went to the archives and pulled the records. Because I think it made for a much better story.
Oh, yeah, and you get more out of it. And so, again, the story is called The Real Fury, A Tanker's View of War. Kevin published it several years back in WWII Quarterly. And I'm sure you can find out any Google search. It's just amazing stuff, and I really enjoyed it. And it's you know, a tanker story written by someone who knows tankers and knows the armor world. And we all like to work in our, you know, strengths and in our skill sets, our wheelhouse, whatever you want to say. That clearly is an article that did so in which it did. So it was fun stuff.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And you know, John, the one thing that Irving Bromberg was not, right? He was not a chump.
He was not a chump. We are, by contrast, chumps. Now, there's a couple things I want to mention before we get into that. Don't forget to send us questions for future Stump the Chumps at World War II Live at gmail.com. World War II Live at gmail.com. And what kind of number?
Well, the curly Q. The curly Q one.
Yeah, like a 2. Yeah, that's exactly. So World War II Live at gmail.com. And subscribe, like, share, give us comments. I know I'm constantly harping on y'all to do this, but we just really like that part of it. So please do this. And now here we are into Stump the Chumps. So Mark has been lying in wait, as he often does, to make us look foolish. That's really what makes his life worth living. I think.
He's sharpening 2 knives at the same time.
Like a butcher, you know.
Yep.
I think tonight we got some good ones for you too. You guys are going to look real bad tonight, I think.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to the humiliation.
Hey, first, before, I just want to say, in the 90s, right, I was a young guy and I grabbed a camera and I went around interviewing World War II veterans, right? So I have this, archive that I built back then, right? An interesting thing that I think about is when I was doing that, it felt like journalism. Right? I was interviewing these guys. But now, 25, 30 years later, I have a box, and it's not journalism anymore. They're more like, it's archive.
Yep.
It's history.
And so it's history, right? Like, it's really changed. It used to be, you talk to these guys, you put them in documentaries, you had chicken salad sandwiches with them and their wives, when you interviewed them, and now it's just what we have preserved. The voices are quiet, so it's really interesting.
So true.
Mark, if only you hadn't done it all on Betamax.
It's worse. It's on something called DV Mini. Strange.
I remember back then you were saying it's the wave of the future.
It was, right? I got this camera. This is the new thing, and it was bad. So hopefully, we'll hear. I think at some point in the show we'll hear some of those interviews. So but that's down the road.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, so Stump the Chumps today. I promised everyone we had a visual Stump the Chump, so I am going to try to share my screen here, and I'm going to show you something. Can you guys see that?
I got it. Yeah, wow.
Okay, so
looking flag.
A cinematographer that I work with, his neighbor has this flag, and his neighbor says his dad brought this back from World War II. And he has no idea what it is. He's shown it to all kinds of people, and no one knows what it is. He says that the silver part, the wing and the swastika, are embroidered with silver thread. Mm-hmm. And he's just wondering if anyone knows what it is.
So I'm going to start. I'm going to describe it a little bit. This is more of a pennant than a flag. It's like a triangular flag. It's blue. Not sky blue, but not royal blue either. And in the center is a swastika in silver with black outline. And coming from the top of the swastika and swishing to the far, right, is a wing. So I have 2 theories on this. One, it could be a Kriegsmarine or German Navy pennant that they would probably sail from a U-boat as it returned to port, signifying that it had, gotten a kill or something like that, or maybe downed a British aircraft. Or it could be something from the Luftwaffe, like a weather pennant to see, about which way the wind's blowing. John, what are your theories?
Well, I mean, that sounds like both sound plausible to me. I have no idea what this is. So if you're listening to the audio version, go to YouTube. Kevin has described it well, but if you want to see it for yourself, go to YouTube and see it there. I've never seen this before, honestly, so I can't begin to guess. But those theories sound plausible. Especially
what about a British pennant saying that they had knocked down a German aircraft?
I mean, maybe, but usually they just painted that on their aircraft. They would paint a Nazi sign on their aircraft or something. But and a pennant or flag like this could create confusion in ground combat, at least. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're flying this on your tank or something, and I don't think you want that. So I think the weather side thing that you mentioned would probably be more likely.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. I mean,
it's definitely more. Go ahead, Mark.
At the top, right, there's a clasp,
yes.
And at the bottom there's a loop, which makes me think you could tandem add more and make a bunch of these together, right? Like you hook the clasp to the loop on the one above it, and maybe it was just decorative somewhere. I mean, the Nazis were into their pageantry.
Well, a lot of ships, when they would do but signaling through flags, they would have a whole string of flags that would interpret for different things, and so that would make sense with the clasp at the top and the loop on the bottom.
But this doesn't look nautical to me, and maybe I'm just guessing, but it just doesn't have that look to it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know.
Well, the Germans weren't very nautical.
Not in surface fleet, but or they tried. They tried, but it didn't work out too well.
Not a long history.
Yeah. I mean, the wing really seems to scream Luftwaffe.
Kind of, yeah.
But you're right, kind of, not totally. But.
To add to that, so the way you could always tell a Luftwaffe uniform from a regular German army is the eagle and the swastika over the right pocket. Mm-hmm. Regular army, the wings would be straight, whereas Luftwaffe, the wings were curved, kind of like it is on this pennant here. So maybe we should lean Luftwaffe weather, flag or pennant on that.
And then a lot of times the uniforms were a darker blue for Luftwaffe as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the collars were different, but I could always, in black and white photos, it was always easy to spot the eagle. Yeah.
Well, this is definitely I'm stumped. We're all stumped. We don't know exactly what it is. If you're seeing this on our YouTube channel and you know what it is, let us know, because this guy wants to know what his dad brought home from the war. So.
Or just tell me I'm right. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty seldom.
Well, which one? Is it the U-boat thing or the weather thing?
So, it's the kind of thing where, somebody who knows what this is and knows what to talk could glance at it 2 seconds and tell us.
Right.
Yep.
So I just haven't seen that before.
Yeah. All right. I'll stop sharing that. All right, great. So that was
zero grade on that. TBD.
Yeah, he's been stumped. He's, to a lot of people, but I fear a lot of people listen to our podcast, maybe someone out there in our audience. I mean, our audience knows a lot of great stuff, especially about gear and insignia and all that.
Only the smartest people listen to our podcast.
Of course. That's why they're smart. Yes.
That's right.
All right, so let's get on to our viewer questions as opposed to our viewer visual questions. And I thought today we would focus on questions about things on the periphery, like theaters on the periphery of the war. So we're not talking Normandy here. We're not talking Guadalcanal. We're going to talk some odd things. So this high level of stumpability coming here.
Yeah, that's a high probability. Yep.
Says you.
Yeah. All right, so Evan Kinzer from Menlo Park, California, writes,
hey, Evan.
Says, during the war and after Pearl Harbor, there was a Pacific supply route from the west coast to the Soviet Union. I didn't know that. This was carried out by Soviet merchant vessels. Since U.S. submarines were operating against merchant shipping in the Pacific, did the sub-commanders know or care that a target might be a Soviet freighter carrying Lend-Lease cargo? And I guess a more general question was whether Japan imported goods from sea by other neutrals like Chile, Peru, or Mexico, and whether the U.S. submarines respected neutral shipping voyages. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Really good. It's two questions, really. The first, the U.S. submarines are generally not operating that far north. That's not really where the Japanese shipping is, and of course, there's the possibility of clashing with the Soviets. So certainly, they would have been briefed to avoid that. But in many cases, they're nowhere near those sea lanes. So that kind of solves the problem. The second, we don't necessarily carry out unrestricted submarine warfare, but those sea lanes are dominated by Allied shipping in the course of the war. So it's so problematic, I think, and so difficult for insurers, so dangerous, so expensive, that it kind of dissuades Japanese trade with anybody or anything that's not in Asia. So I don't know how you're getting cargo from Chile to Japan safely at that point, regardless of what the Americans do. But Kevin, what do you think?
So I'll go to the second one first. that was a big goal of Roosevelt's administration when he first came in, the good neighbor policy. We had sent Marines into the Caribbean and parts of Mexico, Veracruz over the years. And he said, okay, enough of that. Let's be friends with these guys. Let's take the troops out and make good, solid relations. And because of that, places like Mexico and Brazil join the Allied side. Mm-hmm. So they're not, there's no way they're trading with them. And yet, Japan basically had its perimeter in the Pacific that it was defending. It didn't have a little pinprick, route going further east to Central or South America. That was just logistically impossible. And then getting back to the Soviet side and supplying the Soviets, remember, Alaska is very close to the Soviet Union. And so that's really a very small area where that is going on. And then most of the action, with the exception of the Attu and Kiska in Alaska, most of the action is really Central Pacific. And so, like you were saying, that wouldn't have... those were two parallel lines that weren't intersecting anytime soon. And, I guess my first thought was the Murmansk run, but that's on the Atlantic side. I don't know the name of the... I feel like I've got it up here because we sent troops into the Soviet Union or Russia into the western side at one point during and after World War I. But the name just isn't coming.
So that's you mean like in Vladivostok and that whole neighborhood?
Well, it was there, that Vladivostok,
the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and so, but that northern route, there is a lot of concern though of flawed diplomacy, because obviously the Soviets and the Japanese are not at war, and so there's real concern in all quarters among all belligerents that this will be a tenuous supply link. So even though Alaska is close to the Soviet Union, it's very difficult to make that the main Lend-Lease route. And we are largely reliant more so on that North Atlantic route, which is so perilous, like you said, all the way to Murmansk. Horrible. But really, it's the landward route through Iran that ends up as one of the key things. And I think this is not popularly known in this country, is that initially the Soviets and the British jointly occupied Iran before we were in the war as a kind of supply link. It's the same problem the Allies had run into in World War I. How do you get supplies to Russia when you're facing enemies that control a good bit of the Mediterranean, as the Austro-Hungarian Empire did back then, and the Ottoman Empire too? So here we go again, having to make inroads in the Middle East. So the Americans then joined that occupation, and the three powers then pledged to leave with Iran within 6 months, I think, of the end of hostilities. Two of them did, one didn't. That one being the Soviet Union, which then makes a big grab for Iranian oil through a lot of flim-flamming that I won't bore everybody with. But that's one of the things that helps lead to the Cold War. But that joint occupation leads to a little bit of a poisoning of the well, which, certainly has some consequences later in Iran for anti-Western sentiment and all that great stuff. But that route counts for, I think, about a third of the Lend-Lease material that goes to the Soviet Union, and then the bulk of it going in that North Atlantic route, more so than across the North Pacific there. Though there are some Americans who are thinking in terms like grand strategy. The North Pacific could be a good route into invading the Japanese home islands, kind of from this other flank. It doesn't really go anywhere, of course, but there are some people before Attu who are kind of thinking along those lines.
And John, tell me if I'm wrong here, but if I remember correctly, the whole Iran route and everything, that we shipped, you said a lot of Lend-Lease stuff went there. If memory serves correct, it was a lot of locomotives and railway equipment, because we basically built a rail line through the country, because that's how much equipment and material we were sending through that pipeline, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. So like a lot of rolling stock and a lot of trucks, too. Of course, how many, we send tens of thousands of trucks to the Soviets. A lot of them are through that land route.
I think there's a photograph of one of those trucks with like Soviet, British, American flags all over the front bumper, like, hey, this is the first truck coming through Iran. So,
and that was no safe route too, by the way, because you had the Iranian government in Tehran, which is on board with this, but it's a very diverse and large country. and a lot of different ethnic groups, people speak a different language in Farsi, and deciding, this is my route. I don't really like these people coming along here, and so it didn't mean it was 100% secure and safe. So the agreement you had with the government in Tehran may not mean anything to us as convoy people out in the wilds there, and much less the great welcome you're going to get when you get to the Soviet Union. Of course, we all know about that, how warm that would be. Not. But this was, like Mark was saying, peripheral places. This isn't well known, but we might end up as poor guys on this route serving the whole war, facing a little bit of danger, but certainly privation and dislocation. And then we get home and nobody knows that we even were part of that. At least if we were part of Normandy, everybody would have known that.
Right. No one's even heard of Iran, in
those days,
back in the United States. Yeah. I get the pet monkey, though, if we ever do that.
Yeah, all right, I'll make that deal with you. You get the pet monkey. I'll take the dog. I'll always take the dog. That's
all right.
My dibs. Yeah.
Mark, you got the hookah pipe.
Yeah. My God.
Okay, we got far away from Alaska and the Soviet Union trade there. But
it kind of degenerated there, Kevin. And
it's fun to talk logistics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Do.
All right, I'll give you good credit on that one, though, because I didn't know about this northern route. It's great. And did the Lend-Lease convoys coming from the West Coast, did they go to Archangel, or did they go to like the West Coast of the Soviet Union? Or
they are going north, and then they're going straight across to, I think, Vladivostok, but I couldn't remember about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Archangel, cool. I think, is on the other side, closer to Murmansk.
If I was in my office right now, I know the book I could reach back and pull about where we were in World War I, but I'll explain that later on What You.
That'll have to be right up here.
All right.
Yeah, explain that too, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to the next question, but before we do that, Kevin, you really, gave me an itch to scratch with the $6 Million Man and Bigfoot, because the $6 Million Man, when I was a kid, had an episode that really confused me.
Okay.
And I just looked it up, and it aired on January 19th, 1975, and it was called The Last Kamikaze.
Yes.
Right, because remember in the 70s they were finding these holdouts from the war.
Well, now, hold on. The plot was they found a B-25 bomber somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Asia, so they dropped Steve Austin, and there's a kamikaze who's been taking care of the bomber and keeping it up. And he has to convince him that, they're friends, and he brings him back to civilization with him. God, I'm a nerd.
Well, almost. What he was taking care of was not a B-25.
Oh, what was it?
A missing atomic warhead.
Woo!
But was it in a bomber? But wasn't it? It must have been a B-29.
Yeah, it says a plane carrying a new atomic weapon crashes on an island occupied by a stubborn Japanese soldier named Kuroda, who is convinced he must continue his mission. And so Steve Austin goes in and does it.
So, but I want to say it was a B-25 because there's a scene where the Japanese guy happened to be a mechanic also, and he had continually moved the propellers, and he said, well, you deteriorated this, but you kept this going because of it. I can't believe I remember this stuff.
Well, you're like Rain Man.
You are. And it probably wasn't that accurate if they've got a nuclear weapon and a B-25. Yeah. But, we're talking...
And if I remember correctly, when he jumped, it went...
Yeah. So, what I remember about it, so 1975, I was 7 or 8, right? What I remember about it, fascinated by World War II, even then, wow, here's an episode of World War II, and there's a line where Steve Austin says to Kuroda, look, the war's been over for 30 years. Yeah. And I was confused because I thought World War II had just ended because I had been seeing all this footage on the TV about Vietnam, and I thought Vietnam was World War II.
Oh, really? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And I remember I was just super confused. I didn't understand. Huh.
So I had similar confusion. My father had the 2-volume Time Life History of World War II, Winston Churchill's book. They turned it into 2 volumes. And there's lots of color pictures. My brother and I just would lay on the living room floor and flick through these things. And because it was Volume 1 and Volume 2, and the first one has a lot of stuff with Hitler, and then the Volume 2 has a lot of stuff with Japan, I thought World War I was against Germany and World War II was against Japan. because of Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Speaking true, just incomplete.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for that walk down memory lane.
We'll have to do a whole episode on $6 Million Man in World War II sometime. My buddy Bruce Hall gave me the DVD sets, and so at some point I plan on having a Bigfoot party. Now, quick trivia question. No, it's not even, it's just a quick fact. So, John, you mentioned that Andre the Giant played Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Well, the following season, because it was so popular, they did another Bigfoot episode, and they had to get a different big, tall actor to play Bigfoot. And when it was over, he said the Bigfoot outfit just smelled of beer the whole time he was in it.
You ever see that picture of Andre the Giant's hand, and the beer looks like this tiny little
cylinder
like in the hand? It's the craziest thing.
All right, well,
I'm wondering how many people turned off this podcast.
Yeah, welcome to Obscure 1970showslive.com.
Except the family of Steve Austin or something.
That's right. And Jamie Summers.
Yeah. Farrah Fawcett, did she marry him? Yeah. All right, let's get back on track here. All right, here's a question from...
Well, it reminds me when Steve Austin fought those robots and their faces would fall off. All right, I'm sorry. Refocus.
Back to World War II. Back to reality, my friend.
Back to reality.
Such as it is.
Okay, so this question is from Caleb Emlet.
Hey, Caleb.
And he says, a lot of minor Axis powers join due to Axis pressure rather than a willing desire to join the cause. I was wondering what you guys thought of it. Thought of the following Axis powers. Were they more of a help or hindrance to the Axis? And how well did these countries play their cards that they were dealt? And he mentions Albania, Slovakia, Croatia, and Siam. What do you think about those guys?
Okay, yeah. A lot of directions to go with that. Slovakia is just in a heck of a spot, of course. Taken over by Germany in the aftermath of the misbegotten Munich Pact. But I think a lot of Slovakians are kind of on board because they're basically controlled at that point by a fascist Catholic priest. And of course, a lot of Slovakians serve on the Eastern Front, and some as order police, not necessarily always as combat soldiers, though some did. So I think all those countries have, contributions in terms of manpower. Croatia is a completely different animal, where you have some of the most hardcore fascists in all of Europe, and that's a side of the war that isn't that well known. But the internecine fighting that goes on there between Croatians and many other peoples, whether it's Serbians or many others too, it is absolutely horrifying. And I can tell you, from an American point of view, an American aviator point of view, when guys are getting shot down there, the last people you wanted to come under control is the Croatian fascists. You wanted the Germans to capture you compared to these guys. Thailand is really an interesting case too. On the other side, they have almost no choice but to be kind of in the Japanese sphere, because the Japanese had occupied Southeast Asia right next door, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And that actually has accelerated tension between the U.S. and Japan that ultimately leads to war, ironically. But the Thais were never down with the idea of really being an ally of the Japanese. So they're always playing their cards in such a way that they would eventually kind of come back to the Allied side, and especially the Americans. And they're kind of looking to the Americans for a lifeline. It establishes an alliance that still is intact today, 80 years later. I think we tend to forget. Thailand is one of our most important allies in Asia, certainly, but arguably anywhere, and certainly was during the Vietnam War. Albania, they're just kind of screwed by geography, honestly, and in the middle of that Balkan mess. But honestly, it's like a civil war there, like it is in so many other places. Yeah,
no, John, I totally agree. And I'm thinking of the Chetniks that were just. It's almost like tribal warfare in a way in that part of Eastern Europe, where they're just turning on each other. But you got to remember, a lot of these Eastern European countries, they are very anti-communist themselves, and they've purged their governments of communists. They're not these striving democracies like we consider ourselves. They really were a lot of monarchies with some soft democracy, I guess, going. So they were all on board with this anti-Soviet idea, that the Reds were coming to take civilized and cultured Europe. And so, you even have, Spain, which is technically neutral, putting together a whole, I guess it's called the Blue Division that goes and fights on the Soviet front. When I think of an ally of the Axis that is a real hindrance, I would be Italy, because Mussolini's going into North Africa and getting his butt kicked, and Hitler has to come in. He's trying to go into Greece. And all of these things where Hitler has to stop his plans and help out Mussolini delays his big plan of invading the Soviet Union. And some historians, I don't know enough to really to weigh in, but they say if Hitler had been able to invade, commit Operation Barbarossa, 2 months or a month earlier, he wouldn't have had the weather that he dealt with when he got to Moscow. I don't know if that's true or not, because there's so many factors that factor in. But no, because those other countries, they simply were manpower for the Nazi war machine. They weren't really making independent strategic decisions. And I guess the one that was really the most on the fence, I think, was Hungary. Because as soon as the Soviets got to the border, they said, "Oh, we're no longer with the Axis. We're with the Allies now." And it was like the snap of a finger. They changed sides. Yeah.
They all did.
You're right. I guess maybe Hungary was the first one to do it.
Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Finland. But they're all. It's a proposition in diplomacy. When the German seems supreme, and these countries go along, and that leads to the supremacy of the fascist movements in those various countries. The Romanians, obviously, a terrible situation there, and also Hungary with Admiral Horthy. That is so they contribute significant manpower on the Eastern Front. The Romanians don't do any favors to the Germans in the Battle of Stalingrad, of course, because they are the ones who famously don't hold the flanks, and you have that. Right. The Italian Eighth Army fights the best it can, but it is a tough time. But I think that's important to step back and understand. The German side on the Eastern Front is very multinational, very multicultural, weirdly. And so you've got also people from other parts of Europe that have fought, like you said, people from fascist Spain have gone to fight voluntarily. And then you get people, Nazi-type people from Denmark and Norway and Netherlands and Belgium. Leon de Grelle and the Rexus would be an example I'd give you. It's, much less all the other auxiliaries, the Poles, the Ukrainians, all the other folks.
Estonia, Latvia, those countries all contributed,
Yeah. So, but are they ultimately a positive or a negative? I think maybe was the question. I think positive in the sense of diplomatic and financial support and manpower, I guess. But, when the Germans are overstretching themselves, that affects everybody. So the Romania can't save them from that. But the Romania, too, by the way, we haven't even mentioned their biggest contribution, oil, the Ploesti oil fields, which is Germany's only internal source of oil. And that is a real Achilles heel for Germany in this war. Yes, they had perfected synthetic oil production, but that was really inefficient. Having to basically take coal and turn it into oil was not going to create as good a fuel as like what the Allies had. And so Ploesti is so incredibly important for them, but nowhere near enough to satisfy their needs.
And Czechoslovakia is a big armament company, country. They got the Skoda works. When you see a lot of footage of German tanks, invading France in 1940, 50% of those tanks are Czech-made. And, in fact, we bomb a lot of their tank factories towards the end of the war. Yeah, the Skoda works. And so they all contributed something. But like I said, they were never really on a strategic level the way Italy was. Making those, they were really providing men and material. And that, you're right, John, on that level, they were a plus.
Yeah, and I would say, the Italians, for all the harm they did, Rommel wouldn't have had a chance if the Italian Navy wasn't bringing supplies over, right? And that
I believe,
possible.
So
I could be wrong about this, but I think Rommel mostly commanded Italian troops.
He did.
The whole time in North Africa.
Yeah.
And, by the way, Italian special forces, special operators, were a real threat to British naval assets in Egypt. These guys, some of them like rode torpedoes in that go in and sink ships and pretty crazy stuff. So that's another myth in this war, is the myth of Italian cowardice. No, they weren't cowards. They were led by horrible leaders, and they were behind the other main belligerents in terms of technology, economy, and popular support. Because if you're Italian, really, what do you have to gain from this war? It's not your war. You're on the wrong side in a way, and then that plays out once our armies get to Italy. The population tends to be pro-American and pro-British for the most part, generalized.
Yep.
Yeah. And just to touch on the Blue Division again, Kevin.
Yeah.
I did some work on them in my kind of war game channel.
Yeah.
And my understanding was that Franco was happy to see them go because they were like these super extreme fascists and they were causing him problems. And they were like, we want to fight communism. He's like, absolutely you do. Here you go.
Go right ahead.
And he shipped them all off and they were never heard from again.
Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out.
They were too hardcore even for Franco. That tells you something.
That tells something.
These psychos were ground up on the Eastern Front.
You want to go die for a cause? Go right ahead.
Good, oblige us. Yeah.
Do all the dying you want.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a great Stump the Chumps. And Kevin, I hear you have a lot to tell us on WWII. So
WWII. This is going to be something else, and we've got a video dimension to this, don't we?
Yeah. So, in case no one has noticed, my background is a little different tonight, and I missed our last taping session because last Tuesday we had a very heavy snow and ice storm here in the D.C. metropolitan area. I live in Arlington, Virginia, not too far from Mark. And I went out last Tuesday, shoveled my car out. A neighbor helped me. We then shoveled another car, and we were wrapping things up. The sun was starting to go down, and everything is a glaze of ice over the snow around here. It was a real, what do they call it, snowcrete or snow mint. And so one of our neighbors, she asked if we could do her car, and she had a minivan, and I was breaking the ice off the top of the minivan and then the hood, and then was taking these big plates of ice, to the curb. And I had just taken a huge piece off the hood and was walking back, slipped on the ice. I don't remember anything. All I know is when I landed, I was on my butt. I looked up, and my left foot was pointing up like it should, but my right foot was pointing out to the right like it shouldn't. And I couldn't wrap my brain around what I was looking at. I'm like, is this right? I'm wearing boots, so they should be stable. And then I just kind of rolled to my right until my foot lined up with my shin and then held it in place. And one of my neighbors drove me to the hospital. He had a pickup truck with no seatbelt and no door latch, but I didn't care. And I was, the nurse looked at it and said, well, you probably tore 2 ligaments. And I'm like, okay. And then they x-rayed and came back and said, no, it's a break. The good news is it didn't come through the skin. And I'm like, oh my God. And so Friday I had the surgery. Fortunately, I had been working on an Achilles injury and had gone to an orthopedic specialist. And in the emergency room, they said, you don't have an orthopedic specialist? And I said, yeah, I do. So they knew him, which was good. And then, so Friday I went and had the surgery, and it was good to see him. He had me in, I guess, Wednesday, where he examined it and told me about the break. And it was interesting because I had gone to him, 2 weeks earlier, and they x-rayed my leg. So he showed me the x-ray of what my leg looked like good, and then the x-ray with the break. And it's my fibula, so the smaller bone on the side of the shin. And so, fortunately, my brother, his wife, and my nephew live not too far away, and they scooped me up and they took me to the surgery, and I'm now at my brother's place sitting in their beautiful living room. And I've been here all week. They've taken really good care of me. You don't realize how incapable you are of anything when you're on crutches. Yep. You can't go to the microwave and then move that plate to the table because you're on crutches. You don't have a free hand. Fortunately, I have a little ring on my phone that I can hold on to and a hook on my water bottle. But, I need help for everything. I feel completely useless in a lot of ways. And I'm sure anybody who's had this kind of injury feels the same way. So it's going to be a bit of a recovery. no marathons in the near future. My big goal is just to get down to New Orleans to the Patton symposium, and I think everything lines up. I think I should be able to make it okay. So, the slip was actually captured on closed circuit TV. There was a security cam, and the woman who lives below me is the manager, and so she showed me the video, and I laughed. I mean, I'm carrying this big block of ice, and then I just drop. So you don't see my legs or anything. It's between cars. It's on top of a third-story building, the camera. But it's like, yep, that's when I broke my leg.
Do we have that video? Can we entertain our audience here? And this, of course, does nothing for the audio folks, but it's another motivator to come to the YouTube channel to see Patton injure himself.
Mark, I sent you the X-ray and the actual accident. So if you put those up, I think our audience would. I don't want to say get entertained, but
a lot of people have been wanting to injure you, for months. Now you did it yourself. So.
And it's so funny when you get into your 50s and your late 50s and stuff, and you get some kind of injury, and you're like, "Oh, I'm going to blow by this. I'll be fine." And then I was thinking about it like a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, "Wait, it's like you get this little injury, and then you get another injury on top of it, and then you never can return to where you were." And I'm like, damn it.
I'm just glad you didn't hit your head, something like that.
It's funny because a lot of people said, like, wow, did that big piece of ice drop on your head? And I'm like, I have no recollection whatsoever.
Probably didn't, I guess. You'd know that, I think. Yeah.
Last thing I'll tell you, I told the nurse on the way in, I said, listen, I've written a bunch of books about Patton. I wrote a lot about this unit called the 6888. I'm probably going to be rambling about this stuff, coming out of surgery as I come out of anesthesia. I just want you to be aware. And so I became aware, and my nephew was standing next to me, and he later told me that when the nurse came to get him to bring him back, he says, what was my uncle? What was the silly stuff my uncle did? And she said, all he kept saying was, hey, can you do this? And that's something I always do with my nieces and nephews when they were growing up, little hand tricks and things like that. So I'm glad I was silly uncle and not nerd historian coming out of anesthesia. So with all of that embarrassment, John, I ask you, what you?
Oh, so we don't have the video, I guess. So
Well, Mark will put it in there.
Oh, you put it up. Okay, good. Yeah. All right. So mine's nothing compared to yours. Very workaday.
Not a single bone broken, huh, buddy?
Not to this point, no. I'm just really deep into Matthew Ridgway's world, and you can relate to that when you're getting to the sort of latter stages of a book, and so I'm into the last few chapters, not at the end, but so I'm into the part where he's the NATO commander, which I think was very timely, to sense, this is a guy who takes over from Eisenhower, because Eisenhower was the original NATO commander, and then Matthew Ridgway takes over him when Ike goes and runs for president. So it's like the issues we talk about today were present back then in 1952, because the NATO partners is like 14 or 15 of them at that point, and they meet in Lisbon, Portugal, and they're in the early part of 52. They're really spooked about what's happening in Korea, and they're really concerned that the Soviets are going to move in Europe, and so they're making all these pledges of how they're going to mobilize militarily and how much of their GDP they're going to commit to rearmament. And of course those are pretty troubled economies in the aftermath of the war, and a lot of places that haven't been rebuilt, and they're not in great shape, but they're scared. And the Americans too are pledging to help, and then the buzz sort of wears off by the time Ridgway's there, because things have calmed down in Korea. Tensions are a little bit less. You've had the armistice talks, and so by the time Ridgway gets there, he's trying to collect on all these IOUs, and people are kind of backpedaling. So, well, we don't really know. So that really characterizes his time as a NATO commander. The frustration, the American frustration with the perception that the Europeans are not giving up to NATO, and all these kinds of things we argue about today. Ridgway is dealing with that back then, and it's true, but only to a point, because the Europeans were mobilizing relative to what they were capable of at that time. So it's really interesting to see his relations. And, of course, Winston Churchill's back as prime minister by then. So he's meeting with Churchill. He has this very intimate dinner with Churchill one night and Harold Alexander. And and Freiburg, the New Zealand commander, and they're like refighting World War II. Churchill takes Ridgway's wife Penny down to the bunker, you know, where the war cabinet met during the Blitz.
Oh yeah,
like all those places we visit today. You know, could you imagine if? And all I could think of was, could you imagine if Winston Churchill himself gave you a tour of one of these places? You know, how cool that
would be. So awesome.
That really would. So.
Yeah. I don't think the Churchill Museum was in the Churchill War Rooms then, but yes, that would still be cool.
There was no museum at that point, but there was, you know, the cabinet room as it was, and Churchill sort of reliving all these stories, and he's in the middle too, sort of writing the series you were talking about. He's done that, but obviously he's dealing then with Britain's role in this whole, you know, new NATO partnership. And Britain is in bad shape economically too, and he's having to deal with that, and also, you know, rearm. And then the other interesting dimension to this. So, who is Ridgway's deputy? Does anybody know who his second in command was at this point?
I'm gonna say Lawton Collins.
No, Lawton Collins was U.S. Army Chief of Staff, so technically he would have been Ridgway's superior, and then Ridgway takes over for Collins. When Collins retires, Ridgway becomes a new Chief of Staff appointed by Ike. But Monty is actually Ridgway's deputy. So imagine that. And Ridgway had served under Monty in World War II.
Yep.
And so now the roles are reversed. So Ridgway meets with him early on. He's like, Monty, got great respect for you. You're a world historical figure. You're amazing and all this. But I want to make clear, I'm the boss, you know, and Monty's like, absolutely, I'll be loyal to you unto the death. And then he'll just like constantly go off the reservation and say stuff that's totally unauthorized and wrong. And Ridgway's constantly dealing with these diplomatic incidents that come about because of Monty, who just can't get out of his own way, as we said many times. Isn't that so him?
So what you're saying is everything is a repeat of not only what's happening today, but what happened in 1944 and 45.
I mean, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess. You know, sometimes, right? And Monty is who he is, and it's hard for him to play second fiddle. He tries. I think he has okay intentions, but then he does what Monty does.
I remember reading Omar Bradley's autobiography, and he talked about how, you know, Eisenhower and Montgomery were going to be together in the top of NATO. And he's like, that same winning team, you know. I'm like, okay, some ghostwriter put that sentence in there. Bradley hated Montgomery.
Bradley detested Montgomery, and you know, he makes it very clear in his memoirs he had no use for him. And Ike calls him a psychopath, famously. You know, when he interviews when he does the interview with Cornelius Ryan in the early '60s, So one last little anecdote, and then we got to obviously wrap up the show. But so when Ridgway comes to Paris originally, and he gets off the plane, of course, Ridgway by then had a young wife and a young son, and his son's a toddler. And the toddler, Matty Jr., walks right past Ike and goes straight to Monty, because he thought Monty was like the guy in command, you know. And so Monty was just delighted and took him by the hand, and it was just so funny, you know. I mean, Eisenhower wasn't angry or anything, but it was just another one of those like little personal incidents. Maybe just the way Monty was presenting himself or something, I don't know. To a little kid, it looked like he was the guy in charge or something. Yeah.
That's awesome, John.
Isn't that great stuff? So, anywho, this has been a lot of fun. As always, I just want to give the reminders. Send us questions for Stump the Chump at worldwar2live@gmail.com, and that's an Arabic numeral 2. Please like and subscribe. Subscribe to us everywhere, but on YouTube specifically, obviously, but on all the audio platforms where we are, you know, Apple and all the others. We love to hear from you. Give us comments. And tell us what chumps we are, and we know it. We need to hear it from you. So it's been great. Thanks, gentlemen, and Roger out.